Hey guys, it's Mather here once again, and as Incursion League is just about to start, it is once again my duty to give you a small list of a few starter builds that you can play right from the start with absolutely zero currency of a new league. And this time around I do have 5 in total, 3 of which I've played in just the previous league, Bestiary, and they are pretty tried and tested builds that are very successful, very good for a start of a league, and should be pretty strong off of relatively simple amounts of gear, and as well as that, they do happen to be skills that got somewhat revamped and somewhat buffed. Now with Incursion there are a lot of revamped and new, and then as well as that, buffed skills, so there's quite a lot of things for you to choose from, and it really is quite tough to decide. I am probably going to play the first one I showcase you, and that is the Double Strike or Lacerate Duelist, and it's going to be a champion. But as well as that, I will put in a couple of provisional builds in the form of an Ignite, Incinerate, or Flameblast type character, and a Saboteur focusing on all kinds of random traps, so you can play around with traps and see which ones you like the best. Overall, it does look like both Ignite and Trapping should be pretty decent for starting a league out, at the very least, off of decent map clear and just getting to the beginning of the end game. But I'm not at all too sold on Ignite doing good single target damage in the absolute end game, but that really isn't something you should be worrying too much about for these starter type builds. So let's jump straight into the first character, which is the Double Strike or Lacerate Duelist Champion. Now the clip we have here is primarily showcasing Val Double Strike. So it did get a revamp and so did Double Strike itself, but the biggest thing is that Val Double Strike now has 2 additional clones rather than 1, and they move a lot faster and should be a lot more intuitive to your build. So the best thing about this is you get extreme value for money in your microtransaction purchases, as you get 3 times the microtransactions you would otherwise get with 2 additional dudes running around looking exactly like you. Now this is not the greatest clip showcasing of the Double Strike because it's a little bit slow, but ultimately with Ancestral Call, with Multi-Strike, with Melee Splash, it should be a really fast character to play, really decent clear speed, and with the additional damage you get when the enemies are bled with Double Strike now, it should be quite a strong competitor for one of the best single targets out there, I think. And in the previous league, I did play a champion Reeve and Blade Flurry character, which was probably one of the strongest characters I've made up to date, because Champion is just so insanely good at the moment for the Ascendancy, and all those physical skills, especially with Shaper stat sticks, are really quite insane at the moment. And as well as that, Lacerate got a pretty large buff in having its attack speed penalty removed and given a lot more area than it previously had. Should still have a similar amount of damage, but attack a lot faster and have much better area, so it is also something you should probably try out in this sort of build, but I'm going to be focusing primarily on Double Strike for the purpose of this character. So as I mentioned, the 2 gems we are focusing on here are Double Strike and then Val Double Strike, which is built into the same gem, and Lacerate. Now Lacerate is just something I think you should play around with on this character, but to me it looks like Double Strike paired with Ancestral Call and Melee Splash is going to be a lot better for clear speed, and then ultimately a lot better for single target, because it now has 100 to 170 damage against bleeding enemies. Now pair that with, let's say, the sword nodes on the passive tree, or let's say a chance to bleed gem or hemophilias, you should have at least 50% bleed chance against enemies, and that means a very reliable extra that much damage against bleeding enemies. And then the Val Double Strikes should help quite a lot for your single target, and ultimately we're going to be building this one very similar to the one that I played at the start of Bestiary, which is a champion Reeve Blade Flurry build. And for reference, you should probably just check out the Bestiary tab here in my build list, click on the melee champion, and we do have everything listed over here as to how I built it, and I do have a catalog of that in the YouTube for the start of the Bestiary League. But I do have the path of building that I've imported into the most recent path of building, and then tried to adjust it for Double Strike as best I can. And there's really not much you need to change. You just change your Blade Flurry and your Reeve into Double Strike, maybe some Lacerate occasionally. We'll be running Ancestral Call and Melee Splash most of the time, but this is our single target setup, and Ancestral Call and Melee Splash will probably take precedence over Ruthless and Chance to Bleed, or even over Maim. So your main priority 5 link, as soon as you start leveling, will be Double Strike into Ancestral Call into Melee Splash. That's your 3 link, then probably Melee Physical, then probably Multi-Strike, or multi-strike over melee fizz, depending how you feel. And then we're going to start running things like Chance to Bleed, Maim, multi-strike, Ruthless, all of the above. Try and fit into a 6-link as best as you can, alternating between the clear skills and the single targets. But by the looks of it, it's going to have some pretty nutty single target damage. This is the single target of the exact same build for my champion, with pretty modest and humble gear, only a 280 DPS foil, so you're going to be looking for primarily physical damage there. Do have a Shaper stat stick, so you try and get some additional physical as lightning and fire, or just something like a Death's Hand for an offhand is a really good start, or pretty much anything for an offhand that gives you some sort of stats, because you only attack with your main hand, so it doesn't really matter what you have in your offhand as long as it benefits your main hand somewhat. Now, the rest of the gear, pretty straightforward. Just try and get life, resist, a little bit of physical damage, and then factor in that we have like another 100 physical damage coming in from that bleed mod, and it's going to get pretty crazy. Damage should feel really good, and the character itself will be quite a beast, I think. Now, I was very much singing the praises of Champion at the start of last league, and it very much came true, because these nodes over here, Worthy Foe, and then Unstoppable Hero, and First to Strike, Last to Fall, made Champion quite nutty for damage and survivability. You get the permanent taunt, which gives them 20% increased damage taken. It means you also cannot have your enemies evade attacks, so you get a 100% hit chance, which is really good for your crit as well. See, if you take that out, you drop a lot of damage and a lot of hit chance, and then on top of that, you get Unstoppable Hero, so whenever you have Fortify up, you will have a lot of extra defense. And once we grab First to Strike, Last to Fall, you get Adrenaline every for 20 seconds every time you get into low life. To trigger that mechanic, we do have over here a Poacher's Mark attached to Blasphemy and Blood Magic. So whenever you are ready to go into Adrenaline mode, you pop that real quick, just press your Poacher's Mark. It takes you into low life. You then regen through some health or life flasks, and you should be good to go for about 15 to 16 seconds of Adrenaline action, which is a huge damage buff, as you can see over here. Tick Adrenaline, another 20-30% damage or so. So personally, I will probably take Adrenaline first, because having 100% damage and 25 attack speed early on is going to be a large damage buff to your, really shittily geared character. But if you're not too comfortable with that, then the first 2 points you take are probably Unstoppable Hero just for defense, and then get into Worthy Foe. I ultimately think I will grab these two first, then these two, and lastly the Fortify one, because I will be playing Softcore. As far as leveling is concerned, you most likely will just go straight down here, grab the life nodes, and then chances are you'll probably need some dexterity, so you got to start going that way. But if you are okay on your dexterity, then going left and into the Marauder tree is probably best. And try and keep things somewhat generic. Don't spec specifically swords or crit just yet. Just try and get some of the generic damage, because you won't exactly know what you have access to early on, whether it's swords, crit swords, axes, maces, whatever. You just pick up whatever weapon is best for you and use it. So try and keep things fairly generic as far as damage is concerned. And should be a really strong character. Double Strike and Lacerate look like they're going to be pretty nuts. As well as that, you can just run Sunder early on, since that's probably going to be better for leveling anyway. But play around with lots of melee skills. This is a pretty easy template for almost any physical damage champion, including the new stuff like Infernal Blow, Charge Dash, all of that. Now next up we have what was one of my most successful characters of the Bestiary League, and my first Uber Elder killing character, the dual Shimmeron Arc Hierophant totem character, using 4 totems paired with Arc, and now in this 3.3 patch, Arc is going to get quite a substantial single target buff, which was the only real downside of the build at the point. Even though it wasn't much of a downside, because the single target was still very respectable, at least when paired with the Shimmerons. Now your single target should be probably about twice as good, and that means you really probably won't even need Shimmerons for the entirety of the game's content, but the end game that you're really going to be going for will be dual Shimmerons. The character starts off being a Hierophant, and you level as Arc or Spark manually until you pick up the totem nodes and can start running totems. At roughly level 16 up to 30 or so, you attach Arc to your totems, and it should be something that can carry you all the way through leveling at this point, since Arc starts out with 4 chains at level 1, whereas previously it was level 2. But I do recommend you try out all kinds of different lightning skills: Arc, Ball Lightning, Spark, and Stormburst as well, and see which one you like most. But for me personally, I really love the chaining of the Arc, and it felt like an extremely efficient clearing skill, as well as having some pretty solid single target, and these buffs should only make it much nuttier, especially when paired with a Vile Arc, which can be used off of totems and will give you the buffs as well. Pair Arc with Vile Arc, and I think this is going to be one of the strongest characters out there next league. Now, once again, you can go down to the old Bestiary League tab in my Community Showcase build list and click the Hierophant Shimmer on Arc Totems and get a full overview of the character as well as previous videos to get a real strong feeling for what the character is and how it's built. But of course, I ripped this straight into the path of building to give us a better showcase of just some things that are going to be changing. So primarily, you probably won't be getting Shimmerons early on, or maybe even later on, because they will be a fairly sought after item, but they are definitely the end game item you're looking for. So the idea then is to get either some daggers or scepters and get some cast speed, some spell crit, and some spell damage on them, something like these over here. But if you really do not want to use wands, then get some daggers or some scepters, and you can leap slam, you can shield charge, you can Whirling Blades as well. You won't have to be tied to just wanding skills, because the reason we do wanding things and have to move around in a wanding manner is because Shimmerons are so goddamn strong that you definitely want to put them into your build and suffer the movement speed penalties. So you don't necessarily have to go wands if you don't go Shimmerons, but if we do that, the main focus or the main change that we have to do is then take out faster casting and add added lightning, because that ends up being a lot nicer since we get different cast speed elsewhere from the wands primarily, and added lightning then becomes a lot stronger because we don't have quite as much of a base coming from the Shimmerons. In this setup, my last link I think was probably going to be Ellie Focus, just because shocking things is really nice, and only once you get the last 50% damage from your 6th link of Ellie Focus is it worth dropping your shock chance. And overall, at the moment, in this entire setup, without anything too special, just no, Shimmerons anymore, and some pretty normal gear, I would have thought. It's about 150k DPS per totem, so 4 totems, sorry, that's 600,000 damage. And if you incorporate the buffs to Arc coming in this patch, we're looking at probably about 1 million DPS, very reliable DPS, so that you can throw down with your totems consistently, and then throw in Vile Arc every now and again, which has got a really nice buff and will buff your Arc damage quite substantially. We're looking at a serious amount of damage, and then once you build your way up to Shimmerons, you should have a very strong character indeed. Now, as I mentioned, leveling this character, you'll probably start out as a Templar, of course, and a Hierophant. Your first 2 ascendancy points will be Pursuit of Faith into Ritual of Awakening, and then I personally went Conviction of Power, but you can grab Divine Guidance first if you are starting to move into the Mind over Matter situation for defensiveness. And I level with Spark primarily up until about level 16, and I got to this as soon as I could, Ancestral Bond, which was I think about level 16, and that's when I attached Spark to my totems and Arc to my totems as well. And Arc did not feel super good early on with totems, but now that it's got 4 chains at level 1, it might be well worth running early on instead of Spark. But I do encourage you guys to play around with lots of different skills for the totems here, and I do think Arc should be good enough now with the buffs that it has received. So you run through here, you grab that over there, and then you go straight over here to the Witch node, so you get as much life as you think you need to early on, and then start building into the crit. And getting over to the Shadow area is pretty important, so you can start getting your dexterity up. But it's a pretty versatile tree, and you really can do whatever you want. Just make sure you keep up your life in the early game, and then start getting the good totem nodes when you can. Now, you can notice that there's not that much life on this build, so we have 136%, but a lot of mana. I stopped getting life at about 130%, even though I originally budgeted for about 160, because with 4.7k life and 2k mana with Mind over Matter, I felt that was more than enough for everything I was taking on, including Uber Elder. So it's entirely up to you if you want to shoot for a bit more life. The option is definitely there. You can unspec a few totem nodes, a few crit nodes if you really want, but ultimately you do not need that much life, I did not think. something like 4.7k with the good amount of mana that you will get Mind Over Matter incorporated into your defensive setup, and then things like Divine Guidance. So there is lots of information for this build out there in my previous YouTubes, but to go over it real quick, you do run Arc attached to the spell totem, and then you have a 5 or a 6 link. Ultimately, your 6th link will probably be Ellie Focus. For reservation, we have nothing reserved except for a Clarity right here, so just a high level Clarity, and we have a Wrath aura attached into an Essence Worm ring so that you can have the rest of your mana unreserved, so you have about 2,000 mana sitting there ready for Mind Over Matter action. I self-cast Conductivity with Arcane Surge, Increased Duration, and Spell Cascade. So this over here triggers my Arcane Surge, which is a really high level. It then Conductivities self-cast onto enemies that need Conductivity cast onto them, and you autopilot generate all of your power charges and endurance charges from Conviction of Power, so you don't have to worry about using any Orbis Storm setups. And your travel skill is going to be primarily Flame Dash, though you can spec or rebuild it into just Lightning Warp if you'd much rather. Though if you are going to be running Shimmerons, bear in mind anytime you crit with your travel skills, you will be taking a vast amount of degen, because the downside of the lightning damage per second only applies when you crit. Your totems do not count as you critting. You critting counts with your Flame Dash or Lightning Warp, so be careful of that. It is going to get some people killed, I guarantee it. And the third and last truly solidified character that I can recommend to you out of this list of 5 is the Elementalist Blade Vortex that I also played in Bestiary League and was one of my most visually enjoyable and stunning characters to date, and that is because the Elementalist has quite a lot of extra shiny stuff from Prolif, Shocking, Conflux, Ignite, and as well as that, Blade Vortex paired with Impulses, and Herald of Ice with the Sin Herald of Ice was just crazy good looking. It was a very fast clear speed character, it was a very enjoyable character, and it had very insane single target damage as well, and I feel like I should say very one more time, very. This character kind of just ended up evolving into a Blade Vortex character, though it was originally supposed to be a lightning based character, and then I just tried out some Blade Vortex action and it was really quite strong. And Blade Vortex this league should be a lot nicer for mapping, because as you can see throughout these clips, rarely do I ever go above like 5 to 10 stacks, and that is only a good quarter to half of the stacks that you are capable of managing at the absolute maximum, because previously that was 20. Now that it's 10 maximum, the damage has been scaled accordingly to that 10, and that means that you're pretty much always going to be charging around and running around with your max number of stacks at 10 throughout mapping experience. So that's going to make mapping a lot smoother, it's going to make damage a lot smoother throughout mapping, and the playstyle a lot nicer, and then ultimately you'll still have a very similar amount of damage, maybe even more, especially when pairing in the Val Blade Vortex, which is going to be a new thing for your Blade Vortex characters. I think this will be an extremely strong character overall, and it can scale extremely high if you use a lot of the really expensive gear, the Shaper gear, craft a lot of cool stuff, and then ultimately run an Impulses. You don't actually have to have an Impulses, though you may think that you need one for the clear speed. For the most part, the clear speed is coming from the Prolif node that then helps with your Shocking, Freezing, and Herald of Ice action, and that's why we get quite a lot of clear speed, though Impulses definitely can help, and I do recommend getting one for the end game of this build. So once again, the fully beefed up and ready version of this character was run in Bestiary League, and you can go down into the tab of Bestiary, check out the Elementalist Blade Vortex, and grab the paste bin. But I of course have also included the paste bin in this little video and imported it myself. And the biggest difference is that you most likely will not be running Spell Echo on your Blade Vortex. So this is our current 6th link without the Spell Echo. Before this, I think I was running No Controlled Destruction and then Spell Echo instead. But for this one, you only really need 10 Blade Vortex stacks, and you should be able to achieve those pretty comfortably without a Spell Echo. So that's going to be your 5 link, and then instead of Concentrated Effect, you run Increased Area most of the time, sub in Conk Effect whenever you want to, but ultimately Controlled Destruction is then your 6th link. We do have 100%, almost 100% conversion with Fizz to Lightning, and of course Storm Charger boots over here, so that's 80% conversion. I've got a lot of lightning damage in this build, but then you also scale a bit of extra cold and various other things throughout Shaper gear, so you can have a nice Shaper sword over here that has extra fire and cold damage. You can have extra fire and cold and lightning and all that from your amulets if you can get them, but primarily you are looking for a Shaper sword or scepter that can have good attack speed and then a good extra bit of physical to extra fire, cold, or lightning type of damage. But it is just a Blade Vortex character. It has insane damage. That's 2.4 million Shaper DPS on 20 blades, and in the next patch it will only need 10 blades, but it will have still that similar amount of damage and a higher tick rate. And as well as that, the Vile Blade Vortex will probably increase your single target damage by roughly double when you can get that Vile Blade Vortex going off during those boss fights, and it should help for a bit of extra clear speed too. So we convert our physical into lightning through the Fizz to Lightning and the Storm Charges, though you can also use Hrimburn gloves instead of the Storm Charges if you'd rather use a good pair of boots instead. But Storm Charger boots double as a good source of extra increased shock effect, because that is pretty important for us, as with an Elementalist, you initially grab these nodes over here and grab Beacon of Ruin. That's what's going to give you lots of clear speed, especially early on when Blade Vortex does not feel like it has lots of area. Beacon of Ruin is what gives you the clear speed, because you get a shock or a freeze on an enemy, and then that prolifts to everything, and all of a sudden you explode a pack. Now that's without the need for impulses, though impulses will help that case. It's mostly Herald of Ice and Beacon of Ruin combo that really get things absolutely rolling. So you also then have shocks from your hits always increase damage taken by at least 20%. Traditionally, against your endgame bosses, a Shaper and that sort of really big, beefy tier 16 type of boss cannot be shocked for almost anything, because shock is based off of the amount of lightning damage you deal to that character, and you deal almost none. But Elementalist has a baseline of 20% shock, so if you then start getting all kinds of increased shock effect from the tree, primarily there's some here, there's some there, there's going to be some up here, which I don't currently grab, and then you get some from Impulses, Storm Charger. You can get it in various places. That makes that baseline 20% even stronger, so bosses are going to take a lot more damage. We then run Essence Worm paired with Wrath for our mana reservation, and once you get all of the Herald nodes over here, and Mastermind of Discord, you can then, similar to me, run Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice, and Herald of Ash all on your mana, as well as Wrath somewhere in your ring, and then that should be enough to get all three Heralds up with an Enlighten and start running quite a lot of extra damage and quite a lot of extra prettiness in your build. For the most part though, this entire build is catalogued in the YouTube videos. If you need a lot more detail, you will start out as a Witch. You probably go over to the Templar area first because the life nodes are very valuable, but then you'll go to the Shadow nodes straight away, because you definitely need some dexterity here, there, just so you can start leveling and using your Blade Vortex very early on. For Jewel Sockets, you're just mostly looking for crit multi and a bit of cast speed here or there, but mostly spell damage and crit multi. And then if you can get a good Elder Jewel with Wrath, penetration, physical as lightning, those sorts of things, or even a Hatred Jewel or the actual Hatred itself as an aura, then that can be very good. But in my build, considering how much lightning damage I have, Wrath ends up being a much higher damage gain for me than Hatred, because as you can see, 2.4 million without Wrath, it's quite a lot of damage lost, and that's a lot more than Hatred would otherwise give. And finally, the last two little builds I want to share with you are basically just provisional templates for what I think could be okay, and that is Ignite, Incinerate, or Flameblast, and some of the new trap skills. So the trap tree would just be a fairly basic template of any sort of trap build that you could do as a Saboteur. Though I am by no means an expert in this shit, take all this with a grain of salt. I'll try my best, and I have crowdsourced a few little trees to try and put together a decent one. Ultimately, it's just a Saboteur, and it should be pretty basic to then try out all kinds of different traps that are now new and revamped. And I do think that if the tree is more or less interchangeable for almost every trap setup. There's just a few little changes here or there, and it's mostly going to be some gear changes and some gem link changes to accommodate whatever trap you then choose to run in the end game. So I would recommend checking out all of the Incursion skill gems that have been previewed for us if you want to play around with some traps and get a better feel for what these traps can do. For me personally, it's the physical based traps that look the most exciting, and that is the Seismic Trap and Explosive Trap. Explosive Trap is going to be your main damage dealer around through monsters and just clearing stuff, and then Seismic Trap should be your big damage dealer, while while also paired with Bear Trap, we can slow things down and do a bit of extra damage there. So primarily I would like to base it off physical and then maybe do some conversion, but these are the two that most excite me. However, by all means, play with any number of stuff, because I do think that Lightning Trap, which is the basically template I'm going to be giving you here, is probably going to be the strongest thing to level with and the strongest skill, maybe even in the end game for all these traps. But it's going to be Lightning Trap and then Lightning Spire Trap, and the tree is just going to be fairly interchangeable for all of these trap builds and skills. And this is the best I could come up with without having actually played a trapper in 2 years or so. So like I said, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert here. I do just play some Path of Exile and avoid traps like any sane, rational person does. But this time around, we can't really avoid them because they look pretty fun and it does look fairly good to play. So the idea behind most of these trap builds now is to grab Saboteur because there's a lot of quality of life in Perfect Crime and Chain Reaction. Chain Reaction is what lets all of your traps go off after any of your traps go off, and that's a huge quality of life for trap builds. Otherwise, you can run a Sunblast belt if you choose to not Saboteur it up like this. But then the other huge quality of life is Pyromaniac, which gives you huge amounts of defensive regen every time you throw a bunch of traps, up to 20%, and 20% can and should be pretty reliable and extremely tanky for you. And then on top of that, you can grab a bit of extra damage in Explosive Expert, but Born in the Shadows is probably just too strong to pass up. Blinding everything near you and also taking reduced damage from those blinded enemies is going to be hugely defensive when running around with your Pyromaniac and taking hits from things, since that's kind of what trappers are going to be doing. But the characters should level fairly smooth and fairly fast because early on you get lots of your concentrated nodes that you really want in the strong life nodes here, here, and here, and then you get all of these trap damage nodes right from the get-go. You get these here. You then probably are going to work straight in over here as fast as you possibly can, because getting clever construction is very important in these trap builds. While leveling, a lot of things are going to try and kill your traps, so getting that early on is pretty damn crucial. And then you can start filling out whatever you damn well please, including frenzy charges over here, power charges over here. But the biggest problem I see right now is with this passive tree, because you can go more down this way, but with this one over here is that your biggest life nodes are all the way over there, so it might take you a while to get there because you can't really bum rush it. Now, the template, like I said here, is of Lightning Trap, because I think that'll probably be the strongest thing to level with, but play around with all kinds of different traps, and I think you may see some decent success. Currently, I think we're just doing Lightning Trap, Trap and Mind damage, which is like a 50% gem now, so that's pretty huge. Cluster traps most likely while you're throwing them for your clear speed, and then you'll have a separate Lightning Spire trap for pure single target, and adjust your damage gems as you need to. This might be a huge overkill of damage for regular clearing, especially since you'll have a separate single target in Lightning Spire Trap. Likewise with all the other stuff, you'll most likely have one trap that does your clearing, one trap that does your damage, so you might not necessarily need to focus that heavily in your clear skill on all these damage things, maybe more utility, but I really have no area of expertise to talk about here. With all these new traps, with the way the traps are being revamped, it's simply a template for now, and most likely you're going to be getting some crit daggers or scepters or even some shaper items if you're doing the physical ones, and then try and get some crit multi on your jewels. Life regen, resists everywhere you can. If you really want to go heavier into your defense, you might want to spec into Mind Over Matter. But for the most part, I think that's all I can say about traps, and that's probably it for that one. So lastly, I have mocked up an Incinerate Ignite tree. Now this tree is entirely based on trying to get as much Ignite damage as possible, and it can be Flameblast, it can be Fireball, it can be Incinerate. So if you're going to try something with Ignite and Elementalist and all of this Prolift shit, I encourage you to try out all of those different skills that have now been buffed, because you can see here that these skills have been quite buffed for the purpose of Ignite, and we won't really know which one feels best or plays best until you actually try it. But you can see Incinerate has a decent amount of damage to start with, lots per extra stage, and then a huge amount for your Ignite on the final hit. So there's that one there. There's Val, Flameblast, and Flameblast has huge amounts of extra ailment damage for each stage. So on your 10th stack, it's probably going to be your most reliable Ignite dealing source out there, but Fireball itself, which is right here, could actually be the best clear skill just by throwing out a few fireballs, piercing some shit, igniting everything, prolifing everything. Who knows? I do encourage you to try them all out though if you're going to go the Ignite route. This one is probably best suited for Incinerate though. It kind of looks like Incinerate's going to be the nicest one for clear, though I base that off absolutely nothing right now, and the tree is just focused around getting fire damage, ele damage, and burn damage. So with the non-crit trees and the combustion gem, you get lots of ignite chance. You should have close to 100% ignite chance just at its baseline with the combustion gem. So currently we only have the chance to ignite over here. Bear in mind that's going to be combustion, and that should give you all of the ignite chance, the damage that you possibly need. The last gem in this setup is probably like Swift Affliction or something, but try things out as you go. Ideally, yeah, I think you'll be running Incinerate, a Durianis Catalyst. I think Loreweave's probably your best chest because it gives you some good ele damage, as well as that the life and resists are not bad there as well. We have Dodri's Damning, so that we can have 2 curses in this one, so that's Flammability and ele weakness. You're running an Anger otherwise. Your ele weakness is attached to Orb of Storms, Arcane Surge, Curse on hit, running a Flame Golem, and we, like I said, don't have an Incinerate to go by for the skill gems yet, but this is the best sort of Flameblast damage I can pull off, and it doesn't look too bad. 180k DPS on Ignite, that'll definitely clear things, and that's in the completely unbuffed Ignite versions right now. Currently, I think just going by numbers, you get like another 20% on Ignite, and then probably like double your Flame Blast. So it should be, you know, a good few 100,000 Ignite damage throughout mapping. I have no doubt that Ignite will be able to map, and map pretty well, especially with the Prolif and with the current Elementalist tree and all of that. But I'm really not at all sold on the single target. I think that'll probably be kind of crappy in the end game because you just cannot get those absurd levels of Ignites that you used to be able to. But we'll see how that goes. I'm sure you'll be able to clear up to at least Shaper with this sort of shit. Whether or not you'll be able to do the Uber Elders and stuff like that is another thing altogether. But currently, this is how it's built. I would beeline straight for Beacon of Ruin. You're then probably going for Pendulum, maybe then Paragon. You're not going to have a huge amount of initial hit damage, but you should have enough that makes the Leech worth it there. And as far as the tree goes, it's pretty straightforward. It builds itself. You're going through here, you're probably grabbing this life node. If you feel like your damage already needs more, grab the damage, but you want to get to the Templar area as soon as possible because these life nodes are really nice, and there's plenty of Ignite chance and area all around there. I don't think there's any right way to go about this one. Just get ele Overload as soon as you can. But for the most part, it's a pretty compact tree. There's lots of life and burn damage everywhere, so grab it as you see fit. I do think it should be a nice enough clear, and it's a decent enough template just for any sort of Ignite damage, but I'm not too sold on it being that great in the end game, and I'm just going to play a little bit safe and go most likely the double strike duelist, because that looks like a lot of fun with the double strike, the speeds, the damage, and the Pog championing. That's it for this starter guide or build video, guys. Hope it helped. Hope it helped you decide builds that aren't these, so then you can avoid Mathel effect, if that's even a thing for this type of build. But yeah, hope it just got you thinking a bit and helped you out in the start for your Incursion League. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to keep me busy regardless of Incursion, because there's like 20 skills I definitely want to try. 20 builds, that's easily a league for me, and it should be a lot of fun. Hope to see you in the stream, guys. Thank you very much for supporting the YouTube channel and the stream. Couldn't do this without you, obviously, because I can't do this to no one. So thank you very much, guys. It's been a dream. So once again, thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out, thanks for supporting, and I'll see you next time.